Hey, welcome to Unlatched Minds. Today I'm talking to Dr. David Allen. Dr. Allen's a retired professor and former director of psychiatric residency training at the University of Tennessee down in Memphis. He's written several books. All his information can be found on his blog at davidmallenmd.blogspot.com. I'll put that in the show notes. So, Dr. Allen's main focus is on family dysfunction and mental health. He really puts a lot of emphasis on the role of family dysfunction in behavioral problems. So we talk a lot about the immediate jump to diagnose any behavioral problems as a quote-unquote brain disease. And from his perspective, that's really, driven by Big Pharma and the pharmaceutical lobby. In a nutshell, we really talked about how we're seeing this trend that everything's a disease, right? I mean, there's been media coverage on this for years, maybe even decades, how, the role Big Pharma has. And we talked quite a bit about Big Pharma. I think the pharmaceutical companies, drug manufacturers are really driving a lot of what we see. And it's really affecting the science. And we talk a lot about that. The other thing he really focused on was again, this is getting back to the family dysfunction, is that how all too eager parents are to accept brain disease diagnoses for their kids, as opposed to acknowledging that maybe there's some problems in the home. And it makes sense when you think about it. So anyway, it was a good conversation. The audio was a little subpar at times. I did the best I could to kind of clean it up. But sometimes it's just the nature of doing these remote conversations. So with that, I give you Dr. David Allen. Well, David, I really appreciate you doing this. I found a few of your blogs, and I think the title of your whole blog series is A Matter of Personality. And I did want to just read your, because what I tend to do is I kind of, dig into some people's work, and I tend to read their mission statement, what they're all about. And, I was like, hey, so just to answer the question, what is this guy about? Your basic blog says, hey, my blog discusses how family systems issues have been denigrated in psychiatry in favor of a disease model by a combination of greedy pharmaceuticals, managed care insurance companies, naive or corrupt experts, twisted science, and desperate parents who want to believe that their children have a brain disease to avoid an overwhelming sense of guilt.
Yeah, all those things have kind of come together, even though they're sort of semi-independent, and they all kind of pointed everybody in the same direction. But also the sort of the medical, the managed care, and it's pushing psychiatrists into seeing people very briefly and only to medicate, not paying for psychotherapy. When I trained in the 70s, all psychiatrists were mostly psychoanalysts, but now they get hardly, even though they're supposed to get psychotherapy training according to the commission that accredits residency programs. It's often an afterthought, and when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right. They want to medicate everything, and that's part of what's pushing the whole field. And even psychologists have been sort of pushed into doing superficial symptom-oriented treatment and not long-term therapy either, because insurance won't pay for it.
Right. Well, I mean, when I read, that opening line that I just read, when I read that on the website, two thoughts came to mind. Like, wow, this dude he's a super skeptic. But the second thought was, and I believe, and I 100% agree with it. And we'll dig into the details of some, what you spoke about in your blog. I mean, it's all relative to the same thing. But I mean, as soon as I read that, I was thinking, okay, you mostly focus on the field of psychiatry, but I feel more or less the same, the same tenets are in place, or the same forces are in place when I go to my doctor, right? There's not many, and nothing up against my doctor. He's actually better than most that I've seen. That's why I like him. But the general, I'd say medical profession in general is, it's not, the question is not, hey, my head hurts. It's not, whatever. It's not how's your diet, how's your family's life doing, how's your stresses at work, how's your sleeping, hey, let's monitor this. Show me everything you've been eating for the past 2 weeks, or how often you're sleeping. Like, there's no time or energy for that. There's just, you have a ache, well, here's a pill. And I don't want to oversimplify. There's a lot of great doctors out there that are trying to move away from that. But system,
but they're getting pressure to spend less and less time.
Exactly.
Physicians too, not just psychiatrists.
Right.
So they're using checklists, which are really invalid, because the checklist assumes that patients know what's clinically significant to mention and what isn't.
Right.
That's especially true in psychiatry, but it's true in a lot of medicine. So they don't do a complete workup, and they doctors are spending a lot of time on these electronic medical records. So there's a lot of talk going on among the physician websites about burnout by physicians, and the managed care people want them to think it's you have poor stress tolerance, rather than that they're stressing you out.
Right.
And that's sort of parallel to what's going on in psychotherapy. It's all you have poor anger management skills, not that there's people really ticking you off all around you.
Right. Well, I mean,
they don't even ask about that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, is it because, so, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you hear the term on the news and like I think I said in my email, like you got me all fired up about big pharma, right? You hear that it's a political talking point. It's always been, but there's a lot of truth there, right? The pharmaceutical lobby is just monstrous, and we can't. I don't think there's anyone in their right mind that would deny that pharmaceutical lobby is not greatly influencing the medical field. Both,
they pay more. The pharma industry spends more on lobbying than any other industry, including big oil and defense contractors. To give you an idea of how much.
Well, I did a little research before this, and you're 100% right. And because you get, like I said, you sent me down a rabbit hole of how like general money spent on lobby. And I think the quote was, not I think, I'm looking at it. In 2018, 3.42 billion was spent in overall lobby by lobbying clients. Pharmaceuticals was top of the heap, 290 million. There wasn't, and I think the quote of the article was there wasn't even a close second.
Really?
So yeah, I mean, 100% right there. I mean, so you can't. I mean, so where, I mean, the proposition we're making here is obviously one sided because we both agree with it, but because this ties in directly into your actual your blog, right, which was behavior problem or brain disease, right? And I think your argument overall was that. The DSM, right? This is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now, this is the manual that this is the official manual that the American Psychiatric Association developed, I guess,
Correct.
Back in the
Correct.
50s. Okay.
Yeah, and we're on the fifth, actually the sixth, because it was a DSM-4R revised. So this is like the sixth edition, and it keeps getting expanded.
Right. And your main point was, I think, back in 52, there was 100 specific psychiatric diagnoses and that was 52, and now here in 2013 or back in 2013 was that when the fifth edition came out? Maybe
I'm not sure exactly. It was around there.
But I think you had said that now we're up to 550 separate ones. So
well, a lot of those are subcategories, so
okay,
it's not quite that bad, but it's there's a lot.
Right.
But some subcategories like in schizophrenia have been eliminated. So there's gives you some idea, which is a major psychiatric disorder, which they pretty much have right all along.
Well, exactly right. I mean, so in I think you kind of called out two reasons for this. Hey, from going to 100 to 550, either the initial psychiatrists back in the 50s or the decades following, they missed a lot, or things that are just normal everyday problems due to trauma, stress, dysfunction that we all live with are turning into quote unquote diseases, which you're saying should not be coined as diseases. At least not all of them anyway. I'm sure there's some that you certainly believe should be. But
and one thing I didn't mention is that there's so-called disease mongering going on, where they expand the definition of the disease beyond all recognition. Like bipolar disorder is a very serious mental illness. It's a real one. But now, if you have a mood swing that lasts 10 minutes, you're getting that diagnosis. I mean, this is just sort of a joke, but it really happened. One of the symptoms of mania is a spending spree, but you can't just have one symptom and make a diagnosis, and it's got to last for a week, not 10 minutes. They still have duration criteria, but everybody is starting to ignore that. So I had one patient that was admitted to a hospital. The psychiatrist must have spent 10 or 15 minutes with her, and she was diagnosed as manic on the basis of one symptom, which was a spending spree, and what she was spending her money on was cocaine. Which can mimic mania.
Yeah, God. Really? Is it? I mean, that seems extreme. That's
true story. Especially in Memphis, because the guy that started sort of the expansion of bipolar disease, I won't mention his name, he was, when I first came to University of Tennessee, he was there. He was one of the faculty members. And basically it was full of hot air. And he knew that a lot of these so-called bipolar 2 people had been abused as children. But he never mentioned that. I mean, he told me that, but he never mentioned that in the public speech as far as as I could tell. So he had bipolar 3, bipolar 4, so everything's on this bipolar spectrum. And autism is getting like that too, where they've expanded it. They've gotten rid of Asperger's disorder, which is probably a mild form of autism, and now they just put it also as spectrum. But just because two symptoms are similar doesn't mean they're part of the same process.
Now, you're less. I mean, you don't think it's because this stuff is that complicated, I know we both agree this whole world is super complicated. And I don't think we know nearly as much about the brain as we do the other parts of the body and other things. But
let me address it, because it's totally complicated if we get into what's a disease.
Right.
A lot of it's semantic, but the brain is literally the most complicated object in the known universe. There's a trillion connections in the different cells in the brain, and they're constantly changing, by the way. It's called neuroplasticity, which everybody's ignoring. So you can have a conditioned response. So if you do an fMRI scan, you might see a difference between two populations, but you don't know if it's really an abnormality or just a conditioned response.
Right.
There's no way to tell.
In that case, it's doing what it's supposed to do.
It's doing what it's supposed to do, exactly.
Right.
Or if you're supposedly, like, my interest is in borderline personality disorder, they are very reactive. They have what they call mood instability, because their moods are constantly changing, and now they always get misdiagnosed as bipolar because of that. But they're not, because they don't look anything like bipolar patients in a real manic episode, unless they're in a rage. But then anybody looks that way when they're in a rage. But if you grow up where you're constantly being invalidated or abused, it's better to be reactive than not to be reactive. There's something called error management theory, which is like if you're where your brain is determining something as a false positive or a false negative. So, for instance, if you're walking in the woods and you see a furry animal, and it's really a raccoon, but you think it's a bear, that's a false.
Right.
That's a false positive. So you run away and you spend some energy, but that's about it. However, if you make the opposite mistake, you think it's a raccoon and it's a bear, guess what? You die. So if you grow up in that environment, it makes perfect sense.
Right.
To be reactive. They get labeled as having trust issues. Well, again, if the people that you're supposed to love and care about you are the ones are totally untrustworthy, you'd be an idiot to trust people.
Right. Your brain would have malfunctioned throughout your entire growth stage for you to trust people growing up. Right.
And you'd be stupid, and on top, it would be dumb.
Right.
Because you shouldn't trust people.
Right.
You'd be, so, on the other hand, if you're traumatized when you're a young child, that does change the stress response syndrome, both in hormones and in neurology, and it may or may not be reversible. But the earlier it is, the harder it is to change it. Plus, if you have a real brain disease, like I think schizophrenia is a real brain disease, if you're in a dysfunctional family where there's a lot of what they call expressed emotion, it makes it worse. It's not the cause.
Right.
It's just an exacerbating. In fact, in psychiatry today, there are almost no known causes of mental disorders. They're all risk factors that increase your odds of getting it a little bit, or decrease, or protective. They can decrease your odds of getting it a little bit. Like
interesting.
The genetics, there's literally thousands of genes that impact human behavior one way or another. Most of them are turned off, by the way, at any given time. But just because you have one doesn't mean you're going to, and each one will just increase your risk of behaving in a certain way a little bit or decrease it. And you have hundreds. And no neuroscientist who's a real neuroscientist, as opposed to some of these psychiatrists who think they are, believes that any complex human behavior is determined by genes.
Right.
They're not. In fact, the only thing I think that the most determined by genes is you're being programmed to respond to attachment figures, the people that raised you, because as a baby, you come into this world not knowing how anything works. You don't know what gravity is. You don't know how to move your hands or anything. So you're programmed biologically to learn that from your attachment figures. And there's this, they call it call and response. When a mother's interacting with her baby, there's literally hundreds of synapses are being formed or strengthened or weakened every second.
That's insane.
That's going on.
Yeah.
They get pruned or pared down when you're a teenager. The ones that don't get stimulated start to disappear. That's part of neuroplasticity. If a synapse gets stimulated, it's more likely to become stronger. If it isn't, it can get weaker and disappear. But it seems like those early learning patterns are the hardest to disappear. You may never be able to really, but you can override it using the thinking parts of your brain. But you still hear those. I call them the old tapes, from your parents. I hear my parents have been dead for a long time, and when I'm doing something that they would disapprove of, I always sort of hear that.
Oh yeah.
Stop me from doing it. But when they're alive, they can constantly reinforce and trigger you, and that's what
Right.
even the therapists don't understand. They look at trauma as like it only mattered if it happened before you were 18, not that it keeps going, because you're interacting with these people throughout much of your life, and they still have that power, whether they like it or not, or whether you like it or not.
Right.
Can't help it. Anyway, so it's a complicated question. There's a lot, and there's thousands of other environmental factors which are constantly coming in and out of your life at various strengths. And then there's what they call a chaos effect, where just a small change in initial conditions can lead to a big change in the final output. So you put all that together and say, well, why don't we know that much about human behavior and what's a disease and what isn't? It's because of all those factors. It's very complicated.
Right. I mean, is it so? I mean, obviously, you're laying out is a true. If you had a perfect world, you could take money and capitalism out of the whole equation. In a perfect world, we would be studying every dynamic you just mentioned ad nauseum. We would have unlimited resources to study, and test subject A. Thousands of people, whatever, millions of people. You need large data sets to understand this stuff, but at the end of the day, money is a necessity in this whole end the world, right?
Yeah, but even if that were true, by the way, it would still be difficult to measure what's going on in the environment, because first of all, you'd have to have a camera on. It has to be like the Truman Show.
Yeah. There's too many variables, right?
24/7,
right?
Because you don't. It's not like like they bring a mother and an adult daughter or a child into the laboratory and they look at the interactions. Well, that tells you better than if you just ask people what's going on, because people lie, or they lie to themselves even.
Right.
We
But
can't read minds.
But they also know there's a camera on them, right?
Exactly. They know there's a camera on it. Plus, people aren't just reacting to what you just said. If they know you all their life, they're reacting to what you just said in the context of your entire relationship.
Right.
So I have a videotape of an adult borderline woman, or woman with borderline personality disorder. We're not supposed to use them as adjectives because it's like labeling people. Got to be politically correct. But so an adult with borderline, and with her and her father. You can call her a woman, right? Yeah, I think.
Oh, I thought you said you couldn't.
A human. No, you couldn't call it. You can't call her a border. You can't use a word like epileptic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, gotcha. I thought you.
It's an adjective, not a noun.
Yeah, I thought you would done with the whole
gender, you can call
gender
her
stuff. Well, that's sensitive as well now. So I wasn't sure if you guys were there already. But
so she's with her dad. The therapist is not saying anything. He's in the background, and they're talking. And if you watch this the first time and you didn't know anything in the background, you figure, oh, this poor guy, the dad, the woman's just literally ripping him a new one, complaining about how he made her do chores when she was a teenager. Even on her prom night, she had to cook dinner, and he hates women and all that. And the guy even says, Jay, anybody watching this, I think you're the one that's got the anger problems, not me.
Right.
So then I run the tape, and then I tell them that, oh, by the way, one of her chores was giving him oral sex when he was between wives.
Okay.
But that's not neither of them mention that. Okay.
Right.
Except they talk about she was having to bring him juice when he's in a spa. Well, he was naked in the spa. But there's one point where the dad looks down and goes, well, I've done some things I'm not proud of. Gee, I wonder what those were.
Yeah.
So they're having a whole conversation about that, never mentioning it. But they both know what it is, and you don't.
Right. So so you have to observe and deduce from what you just saw without. I mean, with you don't have the smoking gun. You weren't even. It was hidden from you the whole time. Yeah.
You wouldn't have a clue.
Right. Well, is it? I mean, so is it? Folks just being, I mean, I guess you can't. I mean, people are complicated. If that dad, for example, is doing that, he's not going to be readily willing to admit that to anybody.
Well, of course not. So. If it's going on, now, like say they were interviewing a kid with ADHD, which is another bugaboo of mine, which drives me crazy. Yeah, there may be some people that have a disorder like that, but most of these people are either sleep deprived or they're victims of ongoing distraction, trauma going on in the home, adverse childhood experiences, parents fighting, child abuse, divorce, boring
Well,
classrooms
I'm
where they're
glad you're
just teaching
saying
for
this,
the
by the way,
test.
because that was like a note I had for the end. I knew we were gonna jump all over, and that's great. That's fine. I was thinking this guy would be like I think when I speak to David, I want to ask him: is ADHD crap for 99% of the,
Most,
or is it
well, I don't know
95
about
or?
99, probably 95.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, they did a study of adolescents in Palo Alto, where Stanford is, which is a
mm-hmm.
really rich area,
Yep.
and a huge percentage of them were staying up half the night playing video games, and were sleep deprived.
Yep.
And then you'll read later a story of sleep where they say, well, if you don't get enough sleep, you have trouble concentrating. Well, gee, you think there's a connection
Right. Exactly.
there?
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
if it's due to child abuse and you ask the parent, or how's things at home, they're all going to say, oh, it's wonderful. You think they're going to tell you they're abusing their children when they know you have to turn them in? Why would they do that? Yet they're just believed, like right off the.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get other observers. So they talk about teachers. Well, a teacher has a class of 35 kids. How much attention are they paying? And maybe the kid's only acting that way in school and nowhere else.
Right.
You don't know.
So it's either it's tough not to get depressed when you talking about this because it's for me it seems so obvious that what you're saying is true, and that maybe folk listeners will be like, oh, there's a whole nother side to this thing, but just chalk up for the sake of argument, and we'll talk about some of the positives and the good things in the field, and before we end here, but I feel like everything you're saying has to be true. The money, I mean, there's not enough time or resource to truly explore the dynamics that is humanity, right? In social interactions and the complex brain and all the stresses.
Yeah.
There's just not enough resource to truly quantify and study. I think there's fields that
and
exist.
And the powers that be in terms of who gets funding is also another factor, which I did get into.
Well, at the end of the day, right? I was going to get there. At the end of the day, you got a lack of accountability. And again, I mean, to give you credit again, your initial statement, the mission statement. That's why I wanted to read it out loud, because it really summarizes everything that we're going to talk about perfectly. You can just kind of repeat that over and over in your head, and like, oh yeah, that's right. He covered it. I mean,
well, anyway, I want to talk about the guilt part though, because I think that's a huge issue.
Well, yeah. So
because I think it's much bigger problem than people in the field realize. Guilty parents.
Well, I was going to ask you about that too. So let's jump to that, I guess. So you had mentioned that, and this is the last part of I'll read your last mission statement here. It's, again, these are the reasons why you think psychiatry is more or less degraded, in a sense that you have desperate parents who want to believe that their children have a brain disease to avoid an overwhelming sense of guilt. So I was going to ask you, what do you really mean by that? Then I thought, oh, wait a minute. The ADHD thing is top of mind for me. I don't have to deal with it personally, thank God, yet, hopefully never. But I know friends that have, and it's like, if there's problems in the home, if there's dysfunction, wouldn't it be a lot easier to go to the doctor, accept the diagnosis as a brain problem, take the medication, and go home? I didn't, in that transaction I just laid out, the parent, didn't have to take any accountability.
Right, exactly. So you don't have to feel bad that you're driving your kid nuts because he's got a brain disease.
Right.
Which he doesn't. There's no evidence that he does, by the way.
Right.
Like I said, those fMRI studies don't tell you whether it's a conditioned response or an abnormality. You can't tell just on the basis of that alone. You need a lot of other data to show. So, well, they'll show differences, and the differences, by the way, aren't specific to any given disorder, because you'll see the same change as another disorder. So if you're comparing them to normals, you're leaving out the fact that it's not specific to that. But there's a lot of reasons why people have trouble paying attention. I don't know. My favorite story is they used to, remember when there were video arcades, and a lot of kids that were diagnosed with ADHD would go to a video arcade where all there's buzzers and bells and lights and people going in and out and screaming and talking and conversations, all these distractions. And these kids that are diagnosed with ADHD are focused on the video game like a laser.
Right.
So you ask people, well, how do you explain that? And the usual answer, and I'm not kidding, was that's not concentration. Well, what the hell is it?
Right.
They just pulled that out of their, what?
Right. You could say ass. Unless you meant ear.
I don't know what your audience here is, but yeah.
The beauty of this forum is that there's no advertisers. We're good to go. No issue.
But yeah, they just pulled that out of their ass,
right.
Because there's no evidence that that's not concentration.
Well, anyone who's played video games, knows they're super complicated and super complex, especially with, controllers nowadays. There's 12 buttons. You have to be locked in. I mean, you have to be locked in. So say that's not
Yeah,
concentration.
and they want to blame that, so they want to blame the screen time on it.
Right,
Well,
right, right,
but they also neglect the fact that the parents are letting the kid do whatever the heck they want on the screen
right,
and not setting any limits on it.
right, right,
So there's that dysfunction going on, and they're not telling them what time they have to go to bed. They're letting them stay up half the night playing video games and have to go to school the next day. So then you hear that, well, kids have a different biological clock and they have to get up a little later. Well, then if that were true, then how would you move from one time zone to another?
right,
I mean,
right. Yeah, yeah.
no, it's you're not letting them go to sleep.
Well, they
and they're
make
not
the
tired
argument
yet.
that kids have a different biological clock than what, a generation ago,
No,
or
no, than adults.
okay. Yeah, I don't
So
know if
that's why they can't. They have to start school. Their argument: they need to start school at 8 or 9 o'clock. They can't start
I've
at 8
heard
because
that. Yeah, I mean, is there any science that supports that? Because my first reaction was that's crap. I mean, just I grew up in a house where if you don't get your ass out of bed and get to school, my father would drag us physically. So we only
well,
only let that
that's
happen once or
another.
twice. It's a little embarrassing. So
They're based on these correlational studies where correlation we know is not the same thing as
right,
causation.
right.
It's the same thing. To use something similar, it's like is coffee good for you or bad for you? Well, if you look at
Yes.
all the literature as a whole, there's as many studies saying it's good for
Right.
you as there are that are saying it's bad for you. So what's going on? Well, I read a book called How Not to Be Wrong by the statistician Hellenberg, and he points out if you take any two populations and you measure two variables, the odds that they're going to be the exact identical in those two populations are almost zero. So everything's going to look like it's either positively or negatively correlated because you can't control for all the different variables that affect it.
Right, right. Who's that?
There's thousands.
Is it How Not to Be Wrong? That's an interesting.
Yeah.
Is it? Who's the author?
I think Ellenberg. I don't have it right
no, I can
here in front of me. Yeah, it's called How Not to Be Wrong.
Well, it's interesting because that's another thing I'm interested in, like just confirmation bias, and I've done a few episodes on confirmation bias and Google and just the internet and all the information and how you can pretty much find anything to confirm anything you want. Both are,
Well, everybody parrots the line correlation is not causation, but when it comes to studies, they ignore it. Like, does marijuana cause problems in learning? So they measure the people that use a lot of marijuana with the people how well they do in school, and there seems to be a correlation. But of course, you're not ruling out the fact that people who come from a dysfunctional home are more likely to A, use marijuana, and B, do poorly in school.
Right, exactly. Right.
And the more marijuana they use, the more true that probably
right.
is.
I know plenty of people that use marijuana, other things and they're super successful, and they use it as a way to get more creative. And those folks are very successful. In no way does that, in no way.
Like Bill Maher.
What's that?
Like Bill Maher.
Oh, exactly. Right. I mean, the Rogans. I mean, all these guys that are just obviously sharp as tacks. I mean, they don't. But you're right. But growing up in school, if you're in that age, you just think about the folks that would be more tied to smoking pot behind the school. They're not the ones. They're probably not the 4.0 student. It doesn't line up with the lifestyle. But
they can be. But
exactly.
The ones that are 4.0 and that are rare.
Right.
Obviously.
They're not. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah, that's yep.
And they forget about the probability and the bell-shaped curve and everything. So, in fact, I read a long time ago about ADHD. They said, well, we don't have any real fair tests of measuring it. They could just be on the low end of the bell-shaped curve in terms of their native ability to concentrate. So we'll just define the lower 5% of the curve as ADHD. Well, that's sort of like saying everybody in the NBA has a growth hormone excess.
Right.
Sort of.
Right.
What do you? No, they're just on the tall end of the bell-shaped curve.
So is it laziness? Is it? In the scientific community, I mean, you actually mentioned, again in your main summary here, you reference naive and corrupt experts. I mean, is it 50-50 there? I mean, I'd rather happen to be a little more naive and less corrupt if I had to pick one, but.
Well, it's hard to know in a given case, because another thing that the drug companies do is, if you look at science, there's always going to be a few scientists in the minority from the majority, and if the ones in the minority are convenient for your sales, for your bottom line, you will fund those scientists at the expense of the other scientists. Right. So you're more likely to get the bad science. They may be right. The minority could be right, by the way. But if you always do it so you can sell more product, you're probably going to pick the ones that are weaker.
Right.
So guess who gets the funding? And if they get the funding, guess who gets students to work with? The ones that have the most funding.
Right.
It's publish or perish. It's almost impossible to get funding from the National Institutes of Health unless you've already done the study almost. They have like a less than a 20% hit rate. So if you're doing something new, you're not going to get funded.
Right.
So you're getting by. So the drug companies don't even have to lie. They just pick on the scientists that are weakest and fund them.
So I mean, are you on an island with? I mean, like in other words, you mentioned, we spoke prior. You mentioned a few other folks that I actually had on the podcast. Are you part of this small minority of professionals in this area that are saying these things? That
there are a few of us, and we don't all agree among ourselves about everything. But basically, there's a lot of, there was a guy Dan Carlat, that he had a book out talking about some of this stuff. And I've talked to him, and he and I agree. He doesn't go into the guilt thing, which I'd still like to talk about, but
right.
But all this stuff with pharma and everything. But yeah, when you're published or perish, and like I had some ideas about, I have a model for doing therapy with these personality disorder patients, and then the NIMH came out with a small grant for startups for people that didn't have a lot of data. But the cognitive behavior therapists, as one school of psychotherapy, control the funding there. And there was a family systems person on the panel that was going to review my grant application, but at the last minute, that person was switched by a cognitive behavior therapist who's big in the field of personality disorders, Marsh Linehan. So guess what?
Oh, gosh, yep.
I'm not going to get funded. You got those psychotherapy outcome studies, which are problematic to begin with, because every therapist is doing something slightly different, whether they are sticking to the program or not. But to get funded on something that isn't in the predominant school is almost hopeless.
Right.
They used to call it the other people from other schools called it the cognitive behavioral mafia, and I got a lot of flack from cognitive behaviorists when I mentioned that. That's true.
Right.
I mean, I might not have got, the family systems person still might not have approved
right.
my grant. I don't know, but I didn't really stand a chance. Some people said, "Well, do you have any data?" Well, yeah, you want to fund my study? I'll get you data, all the data you want.
Right. Well, are you referring to? Because I was going to jump there next. That that the other blog that was on it was on your actual website, David Allen MD blogspot.com.
Right.
Is that the study you're referring to?
I don't know. That's a much wider. The one on Psychology Today focuses mostly on personality disorders and family dynamics.
Yeah,
the other one is the stuff we're talking about is mostly on the other blog.
Okay, you had called out. I think it was NAMI, right? The National Alliance of Mental Illness. And I wasn't aware of this organization until start reading your material. I guess you were asked to do a blog post by them.
I knew they probably wouldn't go along with it, but I thought, well,
right. Actually, that's a good. So
I did
tell that story, because that's an interesting story.
Well, I didn't expect them. If I would have talked about, I just basically wanted to say that these personality disorders are probably not brain diseases, and I didn't I didn't talk about family dynamics or child abuse or any of this stuff that I know about, because I knew, and I'll explain why in a minute, that would go nowhere. So I was just talking about the evidence that these things come and go depending on social context. They're not always like that. And if you have a brain disease like Alzheimer's disease, sometimes it's better and sometimes it's a little worse. But it doesn't come and go like that depending on who you're talking to.
Right.
And I got I said, well, this doesn't correlate with our view on this. Basically, personality disorders, I said, they're putting themselves in the camp of the DSM by saying we view these as mental illnesses. Actually, the DSM doesn't say what causes any of this stuff. They're non-committal about that because we don't really know. So there's a lot of behavioral stuff that's in there. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of false anyways. But they say they want to view it as a mental illness because they don't want to look at the parent behavior. Now, NAMI started out in life as a really great organization because I believe that, unlike the anti-psychiatry people who think that running down the freeway nude because you think the FBI is tracking you with ray guns is a normal variant. I don't think
just
so.
Another Saturday night for me.
Yeah, just without any drug use, of course. No, I think that's a real disease. Right. But we didn't know that for sure. So the psychoanalysts and the family systems people both have theories that blamed it on family dynamics. The psychoanalysis called them schizophrenogenic mothers, and the family systems people said it was a result of double binds in the family. Well, double binds in the family, which are mixed messages basically, where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. That creates personality issues, but it doesn't. It makes schizophrenia worse if you've already got it. But there's absolutely zero evidence that it actually causes it. So these people were really irritated at the analysts, and especially the family systems people, because that was sort of big in the 80s, because they were saying that their schizophrenic children, adult children, were their fault, which I agree. That's a horrible thing to say about these people. So they were advocating for medical treatment for schizophrenia and other major psychiatric disorders. Well, it got expanded to include everything in the DSM, basically. Wow, yeah. So if parents weren't responsible for schizophrenia, then child abuse apparently doesn't cause any mental problems. That's not the way they think about it, but that's what they're saying. Yep. They're either all brain diseases or they're all behavioral problems. No, you can have a little bit of each. That's called either or black and white thinking. We accuse our patients with borderline personality disorder of engaging what they call splitting, which is you're either a god or a pile of manure and nothing in between. But we do that, Right. And they only do that under certain contexts too, by the way. They're actually very good judges of character because they have to be. But I didn't know that when I first started working with them. So anyways, the tent got enlarged. So you have all these families that don't want to look at their own behavior. Right. Plus, guess who starts funding all these patient advocacy groups? Is Big Pharma.
Right.
They used to be kind of self-funded. There was this organization called the Child and Adolescent Bipolar Foundation, which that's another BS diagnosis. There are extremely rare children with actually bipolar disorder, but they're psychotic, have delusions or hallucinations and stuff like that, not 10-minute mood swings. But this was, but there's this guy, Joseph Biederman, I can mention his name because he was at Harvard, and they found out he had all this money from drug companies that he didn't tell Harvard about. And he promised the makers of Risperdal, Janssen, that they would find that this would be a useful drug for these pediatric bipolar kids. Well, sure, if you snow a kid, they're going to be less antsy. You'll be a little less rambunctious. Really, I never would have.
Would have thought.
Never would have guessed that. But he promised them that before he even did the study. He's still big in the field. Well, anyway, they found out because I went at the American Psychiatric Association. One of these guys was talking about they really believe all this nonsense about bipolar children, and one of the people in the audience was telling me that this is all sponsored by these people are enabled by pharma. So they had all these blogs about parenting. All these parents sort of supporting each other and saying, I have all these sick children we have to deal with. So that was the first I heard of it. I didn't know about NAMI until more recently that it's, like you said, you saw the statistics, I think it's like 75% funded by the drug companies. So again, if it's a brain disease, then why not give them a drug as opposed to long-term psychotherapy? Because a lot of these things aren't amenable to short-term therapy. They're just not. Like I said, those early patterns are very difficult to change. Right. And they get passed down from one generation to another. That's another thing most people in the field don't even know about.
So in summary, they asked you to write a blog post. You said, "Yep, I'll do that." Now, did you send them a draft, or did you, or?
Oh, I sent them what was going to be the post.
Okay, so you sent them the post.
I went over and I took out all the sarcasm, all of it. I didn't want to say anything that was blatant. Yes, I have the problem with sarcasm. I have to, as you could probably tell from listening to me, I don't want to tell people they're idiots for believing something and get them to not believe it, because that usually doesn't work. Right. So I went through it and I toned it all down and I sent it, and then I still.
But your theme was that was, just to summarize, your theme was that, hey, I think a lot of these things can be caused by family dysfunction and not the.
No, the theme was not that they're not brain disease.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, you took the family stuff out of it. You said, right.
I just took it out of it because I knew that was never going to fly. And they wouldn't even go that far. They said no, they're mental illnesses.
So if they're not, if they publish your blog that was pushing the more of the theme that, hey, some of these are not brain diseases, so the drug companies would start saying, wait, hold on, we want more brain diseases because we want more, we're going to give you more money because we want more to create more drugs for these diseases.
Right. I think that we're going to do a whole series on personality disorders. I better check into it now that you mentioned that. I think it's this month to see what they are saying about personality disorders, that they're really bipolar disorder. This one guy, Mark Zimmerman, did an actual study where he applied the actual DSM criteria, and he found out that something like 80% of the people with borderline personality disorder that did not meet the criteria for bipolar disorder had been misdiagnosed if they had seen a previous psychiatrist as bipolar.
Well, I mean,
if you just apply the accepted criteria,
right. No, I mean, but a lot of stuff we're talking to too. As we're talking through this a lot, I'm thinking. You mentioned, bipolar. You mentioned, ADHD, personality disorders. You could almost, again, I'm a layman in this world, but I'm just observing humanity and people, right? My kids are always running around like they're nuts. Okay, they're 4 and 6 years old. I think that's normal. Okay, they're crazy. But when we go out and we have a crazy physical activity day, they come home and they pretty much pass out, right? If they're sitting.
Another thing, another piece of evidence. We used to have semesters when I went to school. Now they have whole years. So there's the kids are in a single class can be a year apart. The younger you are, the more likely in the class, the more likely you are to be diagnosed with ADHD. There are 2 studies that show that.
Okay. Well, yep.
Now that could be some kind of a weird correlation.
Right.
I can't come up with an alternate explanation for it other than immaturity has now been labeled as a disease.
Well, that's kind of what it's kind of getting at. So you get kids that are, their frontal lobe is forming, it's crazy. Their brains are they're not even there yet, right? They're seeing all this input and the brain is forming based on all this input around them. They're going to be nuts at times. I call she gets older, she'll hear this, she'll probably kill me, but I had someone talk to me about, when our kids are 2, 3, 4-ish, they kind of seem like bipolar schizophrenics, and I say it jokingly because someone told me that they exhibit those symptoms. But he was
they have imaginary friends.
But he was saying it to me very like, hey, they're going to be nuts. They're going to drive you nuts. They're going to love you 1 second and go ballistic the second, and throw food across the room after they asked you for it and they were starving. Like roll with, and for me it helped because like, okay, they seem insane, but let them just be. Let them.
Well, you have to set limits. You have to set limits.
Oh, sure. But in other words, I'm not going to drug my child because I saw that behavior.
Okay, so
right? Absolutely.
So a lot of these people that are acting out all over the place, they're nobody's setting limits.
100%. Yeah, and my wife and I have to talk about that in terms of when how much on rails you put them versus how much of a box you let them explore a little bit. But 100% agree there. I guess my point was in particular is just I see opportunity to diagnose, put a label on it, and then you can sell a drug for it. And
well, they're doing it with adults now. There's adult ADHD adult ADHD was thought to be non-existent. Now it's everywhere.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, it's. I mean, did these? I mean, what's Adderall's the big one, right? For that, I think, or there's probably a lot of.
Yeah, that's dextroamphetamine. If you, I have a whole bunch of stories, so pardon me. But I directed a psychiatric residency training program for 16 years. So I would go to the meetings and they'd have outside speakers. Well, I got this one speaker from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and he was talking about all the damage that cocaine does. It depletes a chemical in the brain called dopamine, which is responsible for all pleasure. So you get to the point where the only thing that feels good is to take the drug, which it doesn't actually anymore. After a while, you don't get the feeling from it, but people keep taking it, but they can't enjoy anything. They can't enjoy sex.
Right.
So I was going to get up and ask the obvious question, because cocaine is a stimulant like Dexedrine, which is Adderall is dextroamphetamine. So, but somebody else got up and said, well, then, how can we give this stuff to our kids? And you know what the guy said from NIDA? Oh, but they work so well.
So does cocaine when you're using it. I mean, it just does the job, doesn't it?
Well, it improves your concentration. Yeah, if I took Adderall, my concentration would improve too. Right. That's what it does.
Right.
The Onion was going to give out a PhD to Adderall because it assisted in so many theses. And
right. Yeah, no, I know a lot of successful people. I shouldn't say a lot. I know successful people that use it literally as a almost like a cheat drug. They want to outwork and out innovate their their peers.
Okay, but it's dangerous. Back in the '60s, when I saw the Haight-Ashbury before anybody knew about it, and all these druggies, and they said speed kills. The people that like drugs were saying that. Yeah, it can make you psychotic, or it can raise your blood pressure, or you sleep. You lose weight. You're talking to my limit.
Right.
Anyways.
Yeah. No. So what are let's switch it a little bit, and I want to get to your book as well. But real quick, I guess. So what is are you seeing any positive, any change, I hoping, podcasts like this and other mediums are kind of drawing attention to this. In fact, I just looked up, because I've got the number up. I did an episode called Unscientific Psychology, which was basically the theme we're talking about, where, my guest was talking about what he was observing in the field. I think he was relatively new in the field, but he was observing basically he was comparing, experimental physics with theoretical physics, and how the experimental physicists pretty much are constantly testing and trying to, kind of test the theoretical physicists' theories, and they kind of go full circle, and they have kind of a checks and balances that's kind of there, and it's not a perfect, it's not a perfect field, but there's these basic checks and balances are there. And he was really drawing the corollary there to say there's nothing in the field of psychology that does that. And he was just, he was going through a bunch of examples. I'm not remember most of them, but he was basically, he was blown away more or less with how unscientific some of the approaches were to diagnose. And it was a little disheartening, but it's nothing, different than what kind of you're summarizing here.
Well, yeah, then there's no studies aren't replicated. That's the other thing.
Yeah, he was talking about, that's a good point. He was talking about data sets of like 8 or 10 people.
Yeah, they're too small to really, small numbers of people, and no studies to replicate. They don't do the study over again to see if they get the same else. Yeah. Well, that's important. If you get a negative result, you're less likely to be published in the literature. I'm working on an edited book right now with a friend of mine about groupthink in science. And every field of science, it's not just in psychology, it's probably among the worst in psychology and psychiatry, but it's throughout all of medicine and all the hard sciences and all the social sciences. Sure. You can't talk about certain things now on campus without getting fired. That's the political correctness. That's a whole other podcast.
Don't get me started. Because you mentioned, I read one of your actual, I think it was you wrote something about scientists were persuaded against identifying differences in whether it was gender or race or something. And from,
an evolutionary idea of something called kin selection, which is very important. It talks about why we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for our families. And a group of evolutionary biologists back in the 70s came out with this article in the New York Review of Books, I think it was, including Stephen Jay Gould, the sort of most famous evolutionary biologist I know. I used to respect it until I read about this. They say, well, we can't talk about kin selection because it'll be used by political people to justify social Darwinism. So we can't talk about it. So an evolutionary biologist told me that 80% of evolutionary biologists don't believe in it, not because they think it's unscientific, but because it's politically incorrect.
That's insanity. It's just insanity. If humanity allows that and allows political correctness to influence science, which it already has, and it is, and I had I had 2 or 3 podcasts on that already. We have to look ourselves. If people are going to use data against their own bigoted agenda, then shame on them, but not shame on the folks that found the data.
Right. Exactly. But careers get ruined because if your superiors are part of the group, and you challenge the group.
I get it. I mean, it's not an easy, I don't want to make it, sound like it's just, I would just do this. And no, if you're putting food on your table for your family, your job's important. You need to you need to play the game to some extent. But I think as a whole, as humanity, we play that game and allow PC to enter science. I just think it's silly. Whole point of science is to find the truth, right?
You asked about the positive side.
Yeah.
There is a small, growing movement called adverse childhood experience people. They're doing studies on childhood trauma and family dysfunction, and it can be, it doesn't have to be child abuse per se. It can be domestic abuse between parents or parental alcoholism, or multiple divorces and multiple step parents, or kids being put in the middle between fighting parents, and then when they get divorced, one parent poisons the kid against the other parent. That's called parental alienation. And there was a group of fathers, mostly, of course, who wanted that to be in the DSM-5. Didn't succeed as a disorder. Well, it's a real thing, but I don't really want to call it a mental disorder. Personally, I think that's what's going on in the Woody Allen case. There's a lot of things that about Mia Farrow that most people hadn't read about. I think it's I don't know for sure, obviously, I could be totally wrong, but yeah, because Woody Allen ended up marrying her adopted daughter, and she was really angry. Of course, she had been having an affair with her ex-husband, Frank Sinatra, and had a kid even before. It goes back to all this dysfunction anyway. Okay, but that's a kind of chaos and mayhem that's going on in a lot of families, and more, by the way. Borderline personality disorder used to be fairly rare. Now it's fairly common. That's another reason I know it's got to do with cultural and not only family, but cultural things.
Well, isn't that why most? I mean, it's almost a little cliche at this point, but most psychiatrists, when any movie, they sit down and the first thing people say was like, "Tell me about your mom. Tell me about your dad. Tell me about your upbringing." And
they don't do that anymore. They ask about symptoms. That's it.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. It's like I was going to ask, is that still the case? But if that's not, it's because I don't think anyone.
Well, I mean,
really.
There are psychiatrists. I'm not the only one that takes a complete biopsychosocial history. There are a few of us out there. But you make more money if you don't do that, because you can see more patients. And if you work for a hospital or a managed care group, they pressure you to see more and more patients.
Right.
That's one of the reasons I ended up leaving University of Tennessee, because the medical group was starting to do that. When I first got there, the administrators used to work for the doctors. But then when TennCare, which is Medicaid in Tennessee, got started and they formed their own little HMO, all of a sudden we were working for them.
Right.
And the pressure, and I won every battle because I had tenure, thankfully. I won every battle I fought. It was getting to be too stressful fighting these people. You're not bringing in enough money.
Right.
So I'm bringing in more than I agreed to as the basis of my tenure. So what do you mean? Plus the university paid for their rent and their phones. So how high is your overhead?
Well, human greed has no limit, right? I mean,
it has no limit. Anyways, but there are people that are focusing on this average.
Right. But that's the point you're making. There's still a lot of good folks out there, but the system, the pressure is pressuring them in the opposite direction.
Eventually all these fads get reversed. So I tend to be a long run optimist, but a short run pessimist.
Right. Well, now so tell me about your book. I mean, is this the general topic of what you write about, or what's the title of it? And
no, this is my last book. Actually, I have a couple out, but this last one's my first self-help book. Actually.
Oh, okay.
I was approached by the publisher who was reading what I wrote on my Psychology Today blog. I didn't even have an agent, so it was unusual. And I'd never written one. I kind of was going to on my last book, but it ended up being a critique of the field instead of a self-help book. So the self-help discusses if you have parents that are constantly critical, and they're not just occasionally. I'm talking about a steady stream of being invalidating or demanding, and constantly whining or blaming their own problems on you, or telling you never do anything right, or coming around and rearranging your furniture and causing problems between you and your siblings. And they do it constantly, and you don't really want to cut them off, which doesn't really work all that well anyways, because you tend to still have the same problems, because like I said, those old tracks are kind of hard to get rid of. So it's basically a primer on how to approach your parent and knock it off. And I have to say it's not simple. Okay, everybody's looking for a simple solution. Some books they just go the toxic parent route and just tell you should cut them off. But most people, even the ones that say they're glad they did that, really aren't actually get to talk to them. They really feel bad that they had to do that, but they couldn't get them to stop. And I don't blame. This isn't for cases of severe abuse, because the editors correctly say most people should try to confront their parents with a self-help book. They need a therapist to do that. But even though a lot of the strategies that I got are from working with much more severely disturbed families, and they work with those, they're just harder to do, and they have more ways to get you to shut up, and scarier ways to get you to shut up. Like if you confront your mom with the way she's always telling you what to do, and she puts her head in the oven.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to deal
Right.
with. Okay. So I'm not talking about that, but the ones that just don't seem to stop, and you can't talk about it without getting blamed or telling you're too sensitive. So this looks from the or at least a three generational perspective, and it talks about how you have to find out why your parents are doing this, and it focuses on something I call shared interpsychic conflicts. The analysts identified interpsychic conflicts of wish and a fear between the ego and the superego, between your conscience. But what they didn't notice is that people have the conflicts. They didn't get them out of just because they were born that way. They got them because they were shared by the whole family, and they were passed down. And there's reasons why they developed that have to do with culture. The culture changes faster than families can adjust to. So the old rules by which family operated don't work anymore.
Right.
So they're conflicted about it. So they aren't supported like I always use the women's movement as the example, and that ties into the guilt issue, which I didn't get to with you. During I'm way oversimplifying this, but like during World War II, all the men went to war. They didn't have anybody to build the airplanes, so the Rosie the Riveter phenomenon was happening. All the women went to the jobs, and they really thought it was cool. They really got a lot, not all of them, but a certain percentage got this wonderful feeling of being productive and not just having to clean house all day and make meals. War ends, all the men come home. There are literally government propaganda films, I've seen them, which the message is, nice job, girls, now it's time to go home and get barefoot and pregnant. Which they did. That's why I'm part of the baby game. Okay, so that's okay. So they're sort of okay with it, but then they have daughters. And guess when their daughters come of age? In the 60s. Well, what happened in the 60s?
Right.
The feminist movement.
Yeah.
So these women go out and they go, oh, we can be anything we want. We can be astronauts. And then they come home and talk to mom about it, and mom has a bloody heart attack. Why? Because you're reminding her of what she couldn't do.
Interesting.
So it's depressing. So she gets depressed, and then you feel bad, like, oh, I made my mom depressed, or I brought all this wrath, or the whole family comes and jumps down your throat. How dare you talk to your mother that way? What's the matter with you? Or you should go to church and read the Bible more. That tells you what women's roles should be. And if everybody you know and care about jumps down your throat like that, it's pretty intimidating. Okay, so you say, well, maybe I'm wrong. In more functional families, the mother and the daughter just agreed to not talk about it very much, and she goes on and has her career. But then she hears all these messages from the Phyllis Schlafly's of the world that you're ruining your children by not being here for them. And they had all these studies that show that two-parent family where one parent stayed with the kids, and they begrudgingly admitted that it didn't matter which one, but that they did better on the average. On average, again, there's another fallacy called the ecological fallacy where you judge everybody by the average. But anyway, okay. So they're feeling guilty that they aren't there with their kids. So then they come home and guess what they do? They overindulge their kids. They don't set limits. So it's not the fact that they were working that caused those problems. It was their guilt about working. If they didn't feel guilty, it wouldn't matter. Look at the kibbutz, even like in Israel. The parents aren't there a lot, but a lot of them turn out okay. Yeah, if their parents completely abandon them, that's a whole other issue. But if you're guilty, and now it's got to the point where they're on campuses, they're all like, they're all going to break into pieces if you trigger them. Well, when I grew up, all the kids were outside playing and riding their bikes. Now I look at my neighborhood, there's a lot of kids, I never see them.
Yep, that's true.
Because they're being overprotected and overindulged at the same time, which is a message to them is that you're useless. Right. You can't do anything. You can't do anything right. You need to let me take care of you. Right. So you have these helicopter parents, even in college, where if you get college professors will tell you if you give a bad grade to somebody, their mother will come and chew you out.
Yeah. There's a great meme that went across occasionally Facebook's good for something. There's a great meme that went across and it showed, it had two mirroring images. One was 1960s and one was today. The 1960s, it had a parent looking at the kid in front of the teacher, looking at the kid saying, what's with these bad grades? Basically looking at the kid, like, what's with these bad grades? And it said, on the flip side, it showed a picture with the quote today. And it had, the parents looking at the teacher, what's with these bad grades? Right. It spoke volumes, I think.
All right, well, that's just one common pattern,
Right,
but
right.
there's a whole bunch of
Sure.
other ones. So the book tells you how to research these patterns so you can understand your parents, and that's important because in order to approach your parent, if you just dream them a new one, it just causes fight or flight or freeze. They're going to get defensive, and nothing will ever get solved. So you've got to find some way to be empathic with them.
Now, how old are these children?
So that
Basically, is it?
these are for adults,
Oh, adult
adult
children. Got it.
children.
Okay.
Not it does not work with. They don't have the power. There's
Yeah, I was
reason
going
for
to ask
that,
you how much
but they don't have
the
really for people like over
gotcha.
23. Yeah,
Okay.
sort of the cutoff. My type of therapy doesn't work for anybody that's younger than
Okay.
that. I'd have to do I don't do family therapy per se, although I'll meet adult child and one parent at a time in a very
I
structured
think in a lot of ways, sometimes
way to see what's going on.
the complexities of being an adult, an adult child in this issue. You could, I don't know if you're in some of your situations where the adult child has children of their own and they're dealing with a parent, that 3-generational thing. I don't know if that's exactly what you were referencing,
Yeah,
but that really gets
that happens.
complicated.
That's one common pattern where the grandparents are criticizing the parents
Right.
for what they do, or they're constantly messing around
Right.
with it. There also are situations where the parents literally give the kid to the grandparents to raise as a gift because the grandparents have a pathological empty nest.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, so I've learned about a lot of these patterns. Well, anyways, so if you can be empathic with them, then I have a whole bunch of strategies in the book for when they do this to get you to shut up. Here's some possible strategies, and everybody's different. So you have to role play these with somebody that can help you out. It doesn't have to be a therapist. And since spouses are just as involved, because you tend to marry these common conflicts that everybody shares, your spouse is very likely in their family are also likely to share the same conflicts.
Interesting.
So you can get some people with it's sort of, and it can be, it may not appear that way. They may appear to be polar opposites, but that's a clue. So you have one family where everybody's angry all the time, and it's anger diarrhea, and in the other family it's anger constipation. Nobody speaks up about anything, but it's the same conflict. Right. Okay. So I give several different strategies for how to approach it at the end and what if they come back with this? You have to think 2 or 3 moves ahead, like a chess match. That's why it's not easy. I wish there was an easy way.
Well, that's not. I mean, that theme sounds super helpful. I don't think any among us couldn't get something out of that. I mean, those strategies. I mean, just the dynamic between because you got a dynamic in children and your grandchildren. You add that to the mix. There's a hierarchy there that complicates the heck out of everything. Right? You're not just dealing with someone else on the street or a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it might be. You have this hierarchy that's in place that really makes things complicated.
Well, yeah, and there's ethnic issues also, and that's always a political minefield too. Like if you talk about some of the things that racism has caused in Black people, you get accused of being a racist. But you got to look at those things. There's a book called Ethnicity and Family Therapy that says, well, I'm just going to ignore that basically. I'm not talking. I know it's a stereotype. We're dealing with somewhat stereotypes, but there's some truth, and there's always going to be people that don't fit the stereotype. But yeah, there's so if you like why well, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah,
we'll get a lot of but anyway, so you have to. There's ethnic issues. There's trauma issues. If let's say a woman tried to have a career and she got murdered by somebody, well, that family is more likely to have conflicts over women's career than a family where that didn't happen. But it gets passed down it can pass down several generations. Sometimes in therapy it goes back, you lose track as the people aren't alive anymore. You can't find out. So you have to make an educated guess, but usually and there are a lot of historical things that a lot of people don't even know about. Like during, there was one book, blocking on the name by a lady named Cohen, that was talking about during when India was colonized and the British men were away for a long time, a lot of their wives had affairs and had kids. And they lied about the parenting, and they would adopt them out to other families who would then lie about the parenting. Well, most people didn't know, most of the kids didn't know that was happening. Of course, the men in India were doing the same thing. They were having kids with Indian women. So all that. So yeah, if you don't know, you have to be a bit of a historian.
I was going to say, that's some deep history.
It's complicated.
Yeah. Now, what is the title of this book?
It's called Coping with Critical, Demanding, and Dysfunctional Parents. Powerful strategies to help adult children maintain boundaries and stay sane.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a timeless, evergreen type topic, I would think. I mean, I don't think anyone could not get some some tidbit out of there that would help them in their day to day.
Yeah, there's a lot of books that focus on certain types of parents, like narcissistic
Right.
fathers and stuff like this. But again, they don't look into the 3-generational aspect and the fact that you're kind of sacrificing yourself to stabilize them in a lot of cases. Because it's scary to see your mother stick her head in the oven. Use a severe example.
Right.
Your whole family comes down.
And you love them, right? At some point, on some level, you love them, no matter how they, So it doesn't get any more complicated than that. Family,
right?
Family, huh? Well, David, I mean, anything else you want to? I think we got about an hour and 10 here.
Okay, well, I got into the guilt thing as part of this.
What's that?
That's one fact. I got into the parental guilt thing. A lot of people feel guilty because there's a lot of two-career families. Not that having a two-career family is bad, but because they feel guilty, like it is bad, because they're hearing it from a lot of different interest groups that are feeding into their guilt, and that's, I think, what's going on.
Right.
And it's been getting worse. And then, of course, there's also with people with borderline personality disorder, I think, is that the parents really didn't want kids in the first place, but they felt like it's God's command that they have to be fruitful and multiply. So they both need the kid around and hate the kid at the same time.
Right.
It gets pretty complicated. So those are some other things I talk about more extensively, especially in the Psychology Today blog.
Huh. Well, I don't think this was a motivational speech podcast. I think it was no, it's super interesting. And I mean, everything you touch on, it's like, again, like I kind of said at the beginning, I tend to see most things, I tend to see through the BS in most things. And unfortunately, everything we talked about, I pretty much agree with when I read through a lot of your material. And it's unfortunate, but there's like this guise out there that everything is pretty much a guise and a front, and then the real story is money, greed, it's lack of understanding, or, again, going back to your main, mission statement there. And I'm going to put that in the show notes, by the way, because I think it's just a great summary for everything we talked about. But well, David, I really appreciate your time. And where could people get your book? Is it pretty much anywhere? Or?
It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's a major publisher.
Excellent. Okay.
So it's I think even some Barnes & Nobles, they were carrying it, hard copies of it.
They still in business?
Still are not. Yeah, there's fewer stores, but there's still some brick and mortar bookstores. Not very. But yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on the publisher's New Harbinger. It's on their site. It's on Barnes & Noble, and it's available on paperback, and they priced it nicely. So
very cool. Very cool. All right, David, well, I'd like to do this again. This was great. I mean, I think this probably, I don't know. I get a feeling when I'm talking to certain folks that, you can go for 4 or 5 hours. I think that's a good sign. I think we got plenty of material, so we should definitely do this again.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Thanks, David. And that is it. Thank you for listening. This is Unlatched Mind. We'll see you next time. See ya.